You don't deserve this animal, laughed the doctor. But when he found out who he was, Robert Johnson held Buddy against his chest while people around him watched with contempt in the waiting room of the most expensive clinic in New York City. His little four-legged companion was breathing with difficulty, and every passing second increased his desperation. That's when the veterinarian came out of his office and saw him there, standing in the middle of the elegant reception area. The young professional stopped and let out a laugh that echoed throughout the room. "You don't deserve this animal," shouted Dr. Michael Reynolds for everyone to hear. "People like you should be banned from having pets." Robert felt his heart race. His fingers trembled as he stroked Buddy's head, who whimpered softly. The other people in the room began to move away from him, as if his presence were contagious. "Please, doctor," said Robert with a choked voice. "My dog is very sick. He hasn't been able to breathe properly for 3 days." "And what do you want me to do?" Michael crossed his arms, showing a cruel smile. "Do you have money to pay for the treatment? Just look at your state. I bet you can't even feed this poor animal properly." A new receptionist named Jessica Cooper stood up from her chair. She had started working there just 2 weeks ago and wasn't yet used to her boss's arrogant attitude. "Dr. Michael, perhaps we could—" She began to speak, but was interrupted. "Perhaps we could what, Jessica?" Michael turned to her with furious eyes. "You've been here 2 weeks and already want to teach me how to run my clinic. If you keep this up, you can look for another job." The young woman lowered her head, embarrassed. Robert realized he had caused problems for her and felt even worse. "I do have money," murmured Robert, pulling some crumpled bills from his pocket. "It's not much, but—" "That?" Michael laughed even louder. "That won't even cover the basic consultation. Are you kidding me?" An elegant lady waiting with her purebred poodle filmed the entire scene with her cell phone. From her smile, it was obvious she was enjoying the situation. "See?" she said to her friend beside her. "This is why I always come here. Dr. Michael doesn't accept just anyone. He has standards." Other people in the room agreed with nods. Robert hugged Buddy tighter, feeling tears burning his eyes. "My dog is my only family," he whispered. "Please, I beg you, enough!" Michael made a sharp gesture. "Jessica, call security. I want this man out of my clinic right now." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. 2 security guards quickly appeared and escorted Robert outside while he continued to beg for help. Outside, he sat on the sidewalk and cried, holding Buddy, who could barely lift his head. The light winter rain began to fall, wetting Robert's graying hair. He covered Buddy with his old jacket, trying to protect him from the dampness. People hurried past on the street, nobody caring about those 2 abandoned beings. "Nothing will happen to you, my friend," he murmured in the dog's ear. "I promise I'll save you." That's when he felt a gentle hand touch his shoulder. Raising his tear-streaked face, he saw a white-haired lady with kind eyes kneeling beside him. "My name is Mrs. Margaret," she said softly. "I saw what happened in there. Can I help?" "I don't want charity," Robert replied, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "I just want someone to take care of my Buddy." "It's not charity, it's humanity," Mrs. Margaret smiled. "I'm a retired nurse. I worked 40 years at General Hospital. Let me examine your little friend." With careful movements, she observed Buddy. The dog was breathing irregularly, and his gums were pale. Margaret knew she wasn't a veterinarian, but her years of medical experience had given her enough knowledge to realize the animal needed urgent oxygen. "Come with me," she said, helping Robert to stand up. "I live nearby. I have some medical equipment at home that can help temporarily. But Mom, no buts. Let's hurry before it's too late." They walked 3 blocks in the rain until they reached an old but well-maintained townhouse. Margaret opened the door and took them straight to a room that had been converted into a sort of makeshift examination room. "My late husband was a doctor," she explained, grabbing a portable oxygen concentrator. "I kept some equipment after he passed." Robert watched in amazement as Mrs. Margaret improvised an oxygen mask for Buddy using a cut-up water bottle and a hose. The dog began to breathe more easily almost immediately. "You saved his life," said Robert with tears of gratitude. "For now, yes. But he needs proper veterinary treatment, Margaret warned him. This is just a temporary measure. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Margaret went to answer it and returned accompanied by Jessica, the veterinary clinic employee. The young woman carried a bag in her hands and seemed nervous. "Sorry for following you," she said, breathless. I brought some medications." "What do you mean?" asked Robert. "I took them without Dr. Michael's authorization," Jessica admitted, pulling vials and syringes from the bag. "I know I could be fired, but I couldn't stop thinking about your little dog." Robert was moved by the young woman's gesture. "But why would you do this? You barely know me." "Because what happened today was wrong," Jessica replied with determination. "Dr. Michael has a reputation for humiliating clients he considers unsuitable. I've thought about reporting him several times, but I need the job." "You won't lose your job because of me," Robert said firmly. "That's not your decision," smiled Jessica. "Now tell me, what exactly does Buddy have? You mentioned respiratory problems, but you seem to know the symptoms well." Robert hesitated for a moment. Then, carefully, he examined Buddy under the room's light. His fingers moved with precision, pressing specific points on the animal's abdomen and listening to the heartbeat attentively. "It seems to be secondary pulmonary edema," he murmured. "Probably caused by heart failure. See how the liver is enlarged, and the abdominal breathing indicates fluid accumulation in the lungs." Mrs. Margaret and Jessica exchanged looks, surprised by the technical precision of Robert's words. "How do you know all this?" asked Jessica. Robert realized he had said too much. I do a lot of research online," he lied. "When you love an animal, you learn these things." But the two women weren't convinced. There was something in the way he had examined Buddy that went far beyond casual online research. "Well, regardless of how you know," said Mrs. Margaret, "the fact is we need to act quickly. These medications Jessica brought can stabilize him for a few days, but he needs surgery," Robert completed automatically. "Surgery to correct the heart valve and drain the fluid from the lungs." The two women became even more intrigued. Jessica had been studying veterinary medicine for 5 years and knew that level of knowledge wasn't common in laypeople. They spent the entire night taking turns caring for Buddy. Robert couldn't sleep a minute, watching his companion's every breath. At dawn, the dog's condition had temporarily stabilized. "Thank you," he said to the two women. "You saved my life, literally." "What do you mean we saved your life?" asked Mrs. Margaret. Robert looked out the window, watching the movement of people on the street. "Buddy is all I have left in this world. If I lost him," his voice broke, "I don't know if I'd have the strength to go on." Jessica sat beside him on the couch. "Would you like to tell your story?" "There's not much to tell," Robert sighed. "I lost everything a few years ago. Home, job, family. Buddy came into my life when I needed it most. He had been abandoned too." "And your family?" Mrs. Margaret gently insisted. "My wife. She's gone." Robert swallowed hard. "Cancer. I spent everything I had trying to save her. When she passed, I just fell apart." Tears began to roll down his bearded face. "I completely lost my way. I couldn't work, couldn't eat, couldn't even get out of bed. That's when I found Buddy in a cardboard box in the rain. He was barely alive, just like me." "And you saved each other," concluded Jessica, moved. "Exactly. He gave me a reason to wake up every day, to look for food, to find shelter. Without him, I would have given up on everything." Mrs. Margaret wiped her own eyes. In her 40 years as a nurse, she had seen many stories of loss and new beginnings, but something about this situation touched her in a special way. "And now, what do you plan to do?" she asked. "I'm taking Buddy back to the clinic," Robert said with determination. "Even if they have to throw me out again, he needs that surgery." "Dr. Michael will never agree," Jessica warned. "He's very proud. After what happened yesterday." "Then I'll beg," Robert stood up. "I'll humble myself as many times as necessary. I don't care about my dignity if it saves Buddy's life." The next day, Robert returned to the veterinary clinic. This time he entered through the emergency door, carrying Buddy, who had worsened during the night. The dog could barely breathe, even with Mrs. Margaret's improvised oxygen. The emergency receptionist, an older woman named Susan, was alarmed to see the animal's condition. "We need urgent care!" shouted Robert. It was then that Dr. Michael appeared in the hallway. Upon recognizing Robert, his face twisted in anger. "You again!" he yelled. "How dare you come back here after yesterday? Susan, call the police. This man is trespassing on private property." "Doctor, the dog is—" Susan tried to speak. "I don't care if it's dying." Michael interrupted her. "I want this bum out of here right now." But Robert didn't leave. Instead, he placed Buddy on an improvised stretcher and began performing emergency procedures on his own animal. His hands moved with surgical precision, administering medication and performing cardiac massage with impeccable technique. Michael stopped shouting, watching in disbelief at the skill with which this shabby man worked. It was impossible for someone without training to know how to perform those maneuvers. "What do you think you're doing?" asked Michael, but now with less certainty in his voice. "Saving my friend's life," replied Robert, without taking his eyes off Buddy. "You can throw me out later." 2 police officers arrived a few minutes later, called by the reception. But when they entered the emergency room, they hesitated upon seeing the scene. A man who appeared to be homeless, performing complex veterinary procedures with professional skill. One of the officers, Sergeant Kevin Wilson, observed Robert more closely. There was something familiar about that bearded, aged face. "Excuse me," Kevin said to his partner. "Can you wait outside for a moment?" The other officer left, and Kevin approached Robert. "Do I know you?" he asked quietly. Robert looked up for a second, recognizing the police officer. "Kevin? Kevin Wilson? Professor Robert?" The officer's eyes widened. "My God, it really is you." Michael watched the conversation with growing confusion. "You know each other?" "This man," said Kevin with emotion in his voice, "saved my dog's life 10 years ago. She had been hit by a car, and all the veterinarians in town said there was nothing to be done. Only Professor Robert had the courage to try an experimental surgery." "Professor?" Michael repeated, incredulous. "You don't remember me, Dr. Johnson," Kevin continued. "You operated on Princess for free. You said every animal deserved a chance to live, regardless of the owner's financial condition." Michael's world began to crumble. Johnson, Dr. Johnson. That name echoed in his memory like a ghost from the past. At that moment, Jessica entered the room, accompanied by Mrs. Margaret, who was carrying a laptop in her hands. "Sorry to interrupt," said Margaret, "but you need to see this." She opened the computer and showed an old newspaper article. The headline read, "American veterinarian develops revolutionary technique that saves hopeless animals." In the photo, a well-dressed, smiling, middle-aged man was holding an award. Despite the now graying hair and unkempt beard, it was clearly the same Robert standing there. Dr. Robert Johnson, considered one of the greatest veterinary surgery specialists in North America, Margaret read aloud, developed a minimally invasive technique that has already saved hundreds of animals condemned by traditional medicine. Michael felt his legs weaken. Dr. Robert Johnson was a legend in American veterinary medicine. His books were references in universities. His techniques were studied worldwide. "This is impossible," murmured Michael. "It must be fake. Coincidence." Margaret showed more articles. Photos of Dr. Johnson receiving honors, speaking at international conferences, inaugurating clinics across the country. In all of them, the same face that was now bent over Buddy with desperation and love. Dr. Robert Johnson, the veterinarian who revolutionized animal medicine in the United States, Margaret continued reading. Pioneer in cardiac surgeries for small animals, Johnson developed techniques that increased the success rate of these procedures by over 80%. Susan, the emergency receptionist, approached slowly. "Dr. Michael," she said in a trembling voice, "the books you studied in college, those on veterinary cardiac surgery." Michael closed his eyes, feeling a wave of shame and horror. "Advanced Veterinary Cardiac Surgery Manual by Dr. Robert Johnson," he whispered. "Minimally Invasive Techniques in Veterinary Medicine by Dr. Robert Johnson." "All the books that formed the foundation of your knowledge," completed Jessica, "were written by him." Dr. Michael Reynolds, who considered himself one of the best veterinarians in New York City, realized he had just publicly humiliated the man who taught him everything he knew about his profession. But how did you end up? Michael couldn't finish the sentence. Robert finally stopped working on Buddy. The dog was stabilized but still needed urgent surgery. Like this, Robert said simply, wiping his hands on a dirty cloth. Life happened. Kevin, the police officer, approached him. "Professor, may I ask what happened? You were the most respected veterinarian in the country." Robert looked at Buddy, who was now breathing a little better. "My wife, Christine, discovered she was sick. Advanced stage cancer. We sold the clinic, the house, the car, everything to pay for the treatments." His voice began to falter. "We spent 2 years fighting. I completely stepped away from work to care for her. When she was gone, I just couldn't go on. I fell into such a deep depression that I lost my way completely." "And how did you end up on the streets?" asked Mrs. Margaret kindly. "No money, no home, no will to live. It was a quick downfall," Robert sighed. "I tried to go back to work, but I couldn't operate anymore. My hands shook every time I picked up a scalpel. People needed a competent veterinarian, not a man destroyed by grief." Raphael felt smaller and smaller. "And Buddy?" "I found him in a cardboard box almost 2 years ago," Robert said sadly, petting the dog. "He was abandoned, malnourished, with pneumonia. He was just like me, someone nobody wanted anymore." "And you took care of each other," said Kevin. "Exactly. He gave me a reason to wake up every day, to look for food, to find shelter, to keep living. We're a family of rejects, but we're family." Silence filled the emergency room. Everyone present was processing the magnitude of what they had just discovered. Raphael approached Robert with tears in his eyes. "Dr. Johnson, I didn't know. I'm sorry, for God's sake. Forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive," Robert replied calmly. "You saw a shabby man with a sick animal and judged by appearances. It's understandable." "No," Raphael almost shouted. "It's not understandable. There's no excuse for what I did. You were my idol throughout vet school. I learned everything I know from your teachings." Robert continued, petting Buddy. "And you became a good veterinarian, I can see by the quality of this clinic. How can you forgive me so easily?" Raphael was desperate. "I humiliated you publicly. I called security. I said you didn't deserve to have an animal." "Because anger and resentment won't save Buddy's life," Robert replied simply. "And that's what matters now." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Raphael wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Dr. Johnson, please let me operate on Buddy. Free of charge, of course. It's the least I can do." "Do you have experience with cardiac surgery on small animals?" asked Robert. Raphael lowered his head, ashamed. "Not much. I usually refer those cases to specialists in New York City." "Then I'll do it," said Robert, standing up. "If you'll lend me your operating room." "But Dr. Johnson," Raphael hesitated, "I don't mean to offend you, but you said you can't operate anymore, that your hands shake." Robert looked at his own hands. They were steady. For the first time in years, completely steady. "When it comes to saving those we love," he said, "we find strengths we never knew we had." The surgery lasted 4 hours. Raphael watched everything like a fascinated student, observing techniques he had only seen in books being performed masterfully by their very creator. Robert worked with the precision of a watchmaker and the delicacy of an artist. His hands, which had shaken with anxiety in recent years, now moved with absolute certainty, guided by love for his little companion. "Incredible," Raphael murmured. "The suturing technique you're using, it's not in any book." "Because I developed it today," Robert smiled without taking his eyes off the surgery. "Medicine evolves with every procedure, my young friend. We never stop learning." Jessica and Mrs. Margaret watched everything through the operating room window. Susan had called other clinic staff, who watched in awe as the legendary Dr. Johnson worked. During the surgery, Raphael asked questions about techniques he had studied, but never successfully applied. "Dr. Johnson," he said during a pause, "that vascular anastomosis technique you developed, I tried it a few times, but I never achieved the same results as in your papers. Because it's not just technique, explained Robert, continuing to operate. It's feeling. When you operate with love, your hands find paths that the mind alone cannot see. How so? Every animal that comes to us is trusting their life to our hands. Robert made a delicate suture. If we operate just for money or fame, our hands are cold. But when we operate out of love, as I am doing now with my buddy, every movement is guided by the heart. Raphael reflected on those words. In recent years, he had become very focused on profit and the prestige of having an expensive clinic. He had forgotten the passion that led him to study veterinary medicine. That's why I couldn't operate anymore after Christine died, Robert continued. It wasn't because my hands were physically shaking. It was because my heart was broken, and a broken heart cannot guide hands to save lives. And now I'm operating to save my own life, Robert smiled, because without Buddy, I am nothing. Finally, after hours of meticulous work, the surgery was successfully completed. Buddy was breathing normally and his heartbeat was regular. We did it, whispered Robert, removing his surgical gloves. His legs trembled with exhaustion and emotion. Raphael supported him. Dr. Johnson, what I just witnessed was like watching a miracle. Every animal we save is a miracle, Robert replied. Never forget that. When they left the operating room, they found the reception area full of people. The news that the legendary Dr. Robert Johnson was operating at the clinic had spread quickly among staff and clients. The elegant lady who had filmed Robert's humiliation the previous day was there, with her phone in hand and tears in her eyes. I want to apologize, she said, approaching. My name is Elizabeth Montgomery. What I did yesterday was terrible. I filmed your humiliation and even supported that injustice. Robert nodded without resentment. It's all right, Mrs. Montgomery. No, it's not, she insisted. I want to make it right. I can cover all of Buddy's surgery expenses and even... Thank you, but I won't accept, Robert gently interrupted. I don't want charity. It's not charity, Elizabeth protested. It's justice. And besides, I have a proposal. She took a deep breath before continuing. I'm a businesswoman in the food industry. I have resources. How about if I fund a community clinic where you could treat animals from low-income families? Robert was surprised. Why would you do that? Because yesterday I saw a man being humiliated, and I supported that injustice, Elizabeth replied. Today, I discovered that man is a hero. I want to help correct the mistakes our society makes every day by judging people by their appearance. Raphael approached. Dr. Johnson, what if we partner? My clinic could provide equipment and technical support. You would be the medical director. Robert looked at Buddy, who was sleeping peacefully on the recovery stretcher. I need to think. It's been a long time since I made decisions about the future. Jessica approached timidly. Dr. Johnson, I know we don't know each other well, but could you accept me as your assistant? I've always dreamed of working with someone who truly understands that veterinary medicine is about love for animals. Mrs. Margaret smiled. Robert, I think you have a new family forming around you. That night, Robert stayed at the veterinary hospital to watch over Buddy's recovery. Raphael had prepared a comfortable bed for him in the office, but Robert preferred to sleep in a chair next to his little friend. Around 3 in the morning, Raphael appeared with 2 cups of coffee. I couldn't sleep, he said, offering a cup to Robert. I keep thinking about what happened today. It was an interesting day, Robert agreed, accepting the coffee. Dr. Johnson, may I ask a personal question? Of course. How do you manage not to be angry? At me, at life, at fate? You lost everything, were humiliated, spent years on the streets, and you're still so kind. Robert gently stroked Buddy. Because anger is a poison we drink ourselves, hoping to hurt others. During the first months after Christine left, I was full of anger. Anger at God, at fate, at the doctors, at myself. And what changed? Buddy, Robert smiled. When I found him in that box, I realized he wasn't angry at whoever abandoned him. He was just happy to have found someone to love him. He taught me it's better to use our energy to love than to hate. Michael remained silent for a moment. Dr. Johnson, may I confess something? feel free. My arrogance. It doesn't come from superiority. It comes from fear. Michael lowered his head. My parents were poor, very poor. My father died working 3 jobs to pay for my education. My mother sacrificed her whole life so I could become a veterinarian. Robert listened without judgment. When I managed to open this expensive clinic, when I started only serving wealthy clients, I thought I was finally safe, Michael continued. I was so afraid of returning to poverty that I became prejudiced against those still in it. And today? Today I realized I became exactly the type of person who would have humiliated my parents when I was a child. Tears streamed down Michael's face. I became everything I hated most. Robert put his hand on the young veterinarian's shoulder. What matters isn't what we were, Michael. It's what we choose to be from now on. Do you really forgive me? Not only do I forgive you, I understand, Robert replied. We all have fears that make us act in ways we're not proud of later. How can I redeem myself? By being the person your parents sacrificed for you to become, Robert smiled. A veterinarian who treats all animals with love, regardless of their owner's financial condition. The next morning, Buddy woke up wagging his tail. Robert cried with joy seeing his little friend completely recovered. Will he be okay? He asked, even knowing the answer. He'll live many more years, Michael smiled. The surgery was perfect. I've never seen such refined technique. Elizabeth Montgomery arrived early, accompanied by her lawyer and a real estate agent. Dr. Johnson, she said, I found the perfect location for the community clinic. It's a large warehouse in Greenwich Village. It can be renovated to have exam rooms, surgical suite, hospitalization. Mrs. Montgomery, Robert interrupted her. This is very generous, but it's already decided, she smiled. Last night I spoke with my family. I told them the whole story. My husband and children were ashamed of my attitude and fully supported the project. Kevin, the police officer, appeared with a bouquet of flowers. For Dr. Johnson and for Buddy, he said. My wife was moved when I told her I had found you again. Princess is still alive, 12 years old. She sends a kiss. Jessica brought a suitcase with her things. I quit the university, she announced. I want to dedicate myself full-time to the community clinic. If you'll accept me as your assistant, of course. Jessica, you have your career ahead of you, Robert protested. You can't drop everything because of... I can, and I want to, she interrupted him. Yesterday I learned more about veterinary medicine in a few hours watching you than in 5 years of university. I want to learn from the best. Mrs. Margaret arrived with a homemade cake. To celebrate Buddy's recovery, she said, and to celebrate Dr. Johnson's rebirth. Robert looked around and realized that in less than 48 hours, he had gained a new family. People who barely knew him but genuinely cared about him and Buddy. I accept the clinic's proposal, he finally said, but with one condition. What? Asked Elizabeth. That Dr. Michael be the administrative director. He knows better than I do how to run a modern clinic. Michael was speechless. Dr. Johnson, after everything I did, exactly because of everything that happened, Robert smiled, you learned a valuable lesson about humility. That makes you a better person than you were before. 3 months later, the Johnson Community Veterinary Clinic was running at full steam. The space had been transformed into a modern yet welcoming clinic where anyone could bring their animal for free treatment. Robert lived in a small but comfortable apartment at the back of the clinic, with Buddy as his faithful companion. Every day, a line of people in need formed at the door, bringing animals that required care. Dr. Johnson, said an elderly woman holding an injured cat, you are an angel. I'm no angel, Robert smiled, examining the feline. I'm just someone who understands what it's like to need help. Michael visited the community clinic every week, bringing donated medications from suppliers and learning advanced techniques from Robert. Arrogance had been replaced by genuine humility. Dr. Johnson, he said during one of his visits, can I confess something? Of course. I'm happier now than when I only had wealthy clients, Michael smiled. I've found that saving an animal's life is rewarding, regardless of how much the owner can pay. Jessica became an exceptional assistant, learning not only surgical techniques, but also Robert's work philosophy, treating every animal with unconditional love. "Professor," she said one day, "why do you never charge anything? Not even from clients who can afford to pay." "Because when you do something out of love, money becomes secondary," Robert explained. "Elizabeth covers all the clinic's expenses. We have donated medications, borrowed equipment. We don't need to charge to keep this place running." Mrs. Margaret became the clinic's volunteer coordinator, organizing campaigns to collect pet food and medications. At 72 years old, she had found a new passion in life. Kevin continued visiting regularly, bringing abandoned animals he found during his police patrols. Princess, his dog, was now one of the clinic's unofficial mascots. Elizabeth made the project a personal cause, involving other business people and creating a support network that ensured the sustainability of the community clinic. One day, a young journalist showed up to do a story about the clinic. "Dr. Johnson," he asked, "what motivates you to work for free after everything you've been through?" Robert looked at Buddy, who was playing with other dogs in the clinic's yard. "You know, when I lost everything, I thought my life was over," he said. "But I discovered that sometimes you need to lose everything to find what truly matters." "And what truly matters?" "Love," Robert smiled. "Love for animals, for people, for life. Money comes and goes, fame disappears, but the love we share with other living beings, that remains forever." The journalist continued asking questions, but Robert was called for an emergency. A dog had been found hit by a car and needed urgent surgery. "Sorry," said Robert, "but I have to go. There's a life waiting for me." As he headed to the operating room, followed by Jessica and assisted by Michael, who had arrived for his weekly visit, Robert reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past few months. He had started as a broken, humiliated and hopeless man. Today he was once again what he had always been, a veterinarian dedicated to saving lives. The difference was that now he knew his true wealth wasn't in money or recognition, but in the gratitude of every family who saw their pet recovered. "Ready for another surgery?" he asked the team. "Always, Dr. Johnson," replied Jessica and Michael in unison. Buddy, who always accompanied Robert during procedures, took his usual spot, lying on a small bed next to the operating room door, like a silent guardian protecting his best friend while he did what he was born to do. And so, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, as they worked to save another life, everyone knew they had found not just a profession but a purpose, a family formed not by blood ties but by bonds of love and compassion. The community clinic became a reference in the city. Veterinary students lined up to intern there, not for the expensive equipment or prestige, but for the opportunity to learn from someone who understood that veterinary medicine goes far beyond technical knowledge. "Dr. Johnson," said one of the interns one day, "how do you manage to stay calm even in the most difficult cases?" "Because I always remember that every animal that comes here entrusts their life to us," Robert replied, stroking a puppy he had just operated on. "That trust is sacred. We cannot let them down." 6 months after the clinic opened, Robert received an unexpected invitation. A university wanted to hire him to teach advanced veterinary surgery. "It's a unique opportunity," said the dean during the visit. "Your methods have revolutionized veterinary medicine. A new generation of professionals could learn directly from you." Robert thanked him but politely declined. "My place is here," he said, "among those who need it most. But doctor, you could influence hundreds of future veterinarians, and that's exactly what I'm doing," Robert smiled, pointing to the interns working at the clinic. "The difference is that here they learn not just technique but compassion." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. One of the most memorable stories at the clinic happened when a 10-year-old girl arrived crying, carrying a kitten that had been hit by a car. "Please," she begged, "save Whiskers. He's my best friend." The kitten was in critical condition, with multiple fractures and internal bleeding. Any veterinarian would say there was no hope. "We'll try," said Robert gently, taking the animal in his arms. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Robert, Michael, and Jessica worked tirelessly to save the little feline's life. The girl waited outside the whole time, praying softly. When they finally came out of the operating room, with the kitten breathing normally, the child's joy was contagious. "Is he really going to be okay?" she asked, her eyes shining. "Yes, he is," Robert confirmed, "but he'll need a lot of care during his recovery." "I'll take care of him," the girl promised. "I'll take care of him every day." And she kept her promise. During the following weeks, she visited Whiskers daily, bringing drawings she made for him and telling stories to speed up his recovery. "You know what moves me most about this profession," Robert said to Jessica during one of these visits. "It's not just the lives we save. It's the bonds of love we strengthen between people and animals." "Professor, may I ask a personal question?" "Of course. Have you never thought about remarrying, starting a new family?" Robert looked around the clinic, watching the movement of volunteers, interns, staff, and clients. "And I already have a family," he smiled. "A big, noisy family made up of people who care about each other and the animals we care for." Jessica understood he was right. The clinic had become more than a workplace. It was a community united by the common purpose of caring and protecting. 1 year after opening, the Johnson Community Veterinary Clinic had already treated over 3,000 animals. The media attention brought visitors from all over the country, veterinarians wanting to learn the special techniques, and people wanting to know the story of overcoming adversity. But perhaps the most moving moment happened when Michael brought a special surprise. "Dr. Johnson," he said, entering the clinic accompanied by an elderly lady. "I'd like you to meet someone very special." "Good afternoon," said the lady, extending her hand. "My name is Martha Reynolds. I'm Michael's mother." Robert greeted the lady warmly. Michael had told him about his hard-working mother, who sacrificed to pay for his studies. "Mrs. Margaret, it's a pleasure to meet you. Your son is an excellent veterinarian." "Thank you, doctor," she smiled. "But I want to thank you for something much more important than that." "How so?" "For giving me back my son." Martha Reynolds had tears in her eyes. "In recent years, he had become a person I didn't recognize. Arrogant, prejudiced, nothing like the generous boy I raised." Michael lowered his head, ashamed. "After meeting you," Martha continued, "he became the Michael I knew again, humble, compassionate, dedicated to helping others. You saved much more than your little dog's life. You saved my son's soul." Robert was moved by the lady's words. "Mrs. Margaret, your son always had that kindness within him. He just needed to be reminded of who he really was. And you were the instrument of that reminder," she insisted. "That's why I came here to thank you in person." That night, after everyone had left, Robert sat in the clinic's courtyard with Buddy by his side. It was his favorite time of day, when he could reflect on everything that had happened and plan for the next day. "So, my friend," he said, petting Buddy, "we made it through another day of work." Buddy wagged his tail as if he understood perfectly. In recent months, he had become not only the clinic's mascot, but also a kind of co-therapist, comforting other animals during treatments and bringing joy to the children visiting their hospitalized pets. "You saved my life that day in the cardboard box," Robert continued, talking to the dog. "And today we saved so many other lives together. Who would have thought 2 rejects could make such a difference in the world?" It was then that his phone rang. It was Elizabeth Montgomery. "Dr. Johnson, sorry to call so late," she said, "but I have amazing news." "What happened?" "The story about our clinic was featured in the national newspaper today. They're receiving dozens of calls from people wanting to replicate the project in other cities." Robert was surprised. "Really?" "Absolutely true. Business people from Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, they all want to fund community clinics following our model. It's becoming a national movement." After hanging up, Robert reflected on the magnitude of what he had started. A simple story of humiliation and overcoming was turning into a revolution in United States veterinary medicine. "Look at that, Buddy," he said to the dog. "It seems our little family is growing to include the whole country." 2 years later, there were already 15 Johnson Community Veterinary Clinics spread across the United States. Each one maintained the original philosophy: free care for animals from low-income families, based on love and respect for all forms of life. Robert traveled regularly to open new branches and train teams, always accompanied by Buddy, who had become a national celebrity. But he never abandoned his base at the first clinic, where he continued to personally handle the most difficult cases. "Dr. Johnson," said Jessica during one of these trips, "do you realize the scale of the movement you've created?" "I didn't create any movement," Robert replied. "I just reminded people of something they already knew, that all living beings deserve care and respect. But you've become a national symbol of overcoming adversity." "The symbol is him," Robert pointed to Buddy, who was sleeping peacefully in the car seat. "Buddy represents all the abandoned, rejected, and forgotten ones who found a second chance in life." During one of the openings in Miami, Robert ran into Kevin, who had been transferred to work in the city. "Professor!" shouted the police officer, running to hug him. "How wonderful to see you here." "Kevin, how are you and Princess doing?" "Great, and we have a surprise for you." Kevin smiled mysteriously. He took Robert to his home, where Princess, now 14 years old, was surrounded by 7 playful puppies. "She had a litter at 13, Kevin explained proudly. "The vet said it was impossible, that she was too old. But I remembered what you always said, never give up on a life." Robert was moved to see the dog he had saved so many years ago, now a mother to a large, healthy family. "And you know what else?" Kevin continued. "Each puppy is going to a low-income family that has committed to providing good care. We're spreading love all over the city." This philosophy of spreading love became the unofficial motto of all the clinics in the network. More than treating sick animals, they became community centers where people connected through caring for their pets. Back in New York City, Robert found a surprise waiting for him. Michael had organized a 3rd anniversary party for the first clinic. "Dr. Johnson," said Michael when Robert entered the decorated hall, "we have some special guests." The first to approach was the young journalist who had written the first article about the clinic. "Doctor, remember me?" he asked. "I want to thank you. That article changed my career. Now I dedicate myself exclusively to stories of overcoming and hope." Next appeared the girl who had brought the kitten Whiskers years before. Now a teenager, she carried a letter. "Dr. Johnson," she said timidly, "I wrote this for you." Robert opened the letter and read aloud. "Dear Dr. Johnson, thank you for saving Whiskers, but thank you most of all for teaching me that love has no price. When I grow up, I want to be a veterinarian just like you. I want to care for abandoned animals and show them that they deserve to be loved. Sincerely, Emily Grace." "Emily Grace," said Robert with tears in his eyes. "If you really want to be a veterinarian, you can count on an internship here when you finish high school." The teenager screamed with joy and hugged Robert tightly. The party continued with heartfelt testimonials from clients, staff, and volunteers. Each person shared how the clinic had impacted their life, not only by saving animals, but by restoring their faith in human kindness. Mrs. Margaret, now 75 but still active as volunteer coordinator, took the microphone. "I want to tell you all something," she said. "When I met Robert on that sidewalk, crying with Buddy in his arms, I thought I was helping 2 lost lives. Today I realize that they actually saved us. They saved our humanity." Mrs. Margaret's words echoed in the silent hall. It was true, every person present had been transformed by contact with that philosophy of unconditional love. "That's why," she continued, "this party isn't just to celebrate 3 years of the clinic. It's to celebrate 3 years of a quiet revolution, where we discovered that true wealth isn't in what we possess, but in what we share." As the party was winding down, Robert slipped away to the clinic's courtyard with Buddy. It was their tradition, always ending the day by talking with his best friend. "So, my old companion," he said, petting the dog, who now had grayer fur. "Who would have thought we'd come so far?" Buddy wagged his tail slowly with the wisdom of an older dog who had seen a lot of life. "You saved more than my life in that cardboard box," Robert went on. "You gave me back my purpose. Without you, I never would have discovered that my true calling wasn't to be the most famous veterinarian in the country, but to be the most useful veterinarian for those in need." Jessica appeared in the courtyard, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Professor, I brought you some coffee," she said, sitting beside him on the bench. "Thank you, Jessica. How are you feeling about all this?" Fulfilled, she smiled. 5 years ago, when I started college, I dreamed of being rich and famous. Today I understand that being useful is much more rewarding than being famous. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the city's nighttime activity through the clinic's fence. "Professor," Jessica finally said, "can I ask a question I've always wanted to ask?" "Of course." "Do you regret anything? Losing the fortune, the fame, the academic recognition?" Robert thought for a moment. "You know, Jessica, for a long time I thought my life was over when I lost everything. Today I realize it was actually just beginning." "How so?" "When I was the famous veterinarian, I operated for money and recognition. I was good at what I did, but it was cold, technical work," he explained. "Today, when I operate, it's for love. For everybody, every Whiskers, every princess who comes to us needing a second chance." Jessica understood. "And it makes all the difference." "All the difference in the world," Robert confirmed. "That's why I don't regret anything. If I hadn't lost everything, I never would have found what truly matters." Just then, Michael appeared in the courtyard, still wearing his party suit, but with his tie loosened. "May I join you?" he asked. "Of course." Robert made room on the bench. "How are you feeling after today?" "Grateful," Michael replied without hesitation. "Grateful to have been lucky enough to meet you on my path. Grateful to have learned that humility isn't weakness, it's strength." "And your private practice? But how are things there?" "I've completely changed the model," Michael smiled. "Now I see paying clients in the morning and reserve the afternoons for cases in need. I've learned it's possible to have financial success without losing your humanity." They talked late into the night, sharing stories, dreams, and plans for the future. When they finally said their goodbyes, each knew they were part of something bigger than themselves. The next morning, Robert woke early, as always. Buddy was lying beside him, breathing calmly. At 8 years old, the dog showed natural signs of aging, but still maintained the joy and vitality that characterized him. "Good morning, my friend," whispered Robert, stroking his companion's head. Buddy opened his eyes and wagged his tail, ready for another day of work at the clinic. During breakfast, Robert received an unexpected call. It was from a television producer. "Dr. Johnson, we'd like to make a documentary about your story," the man said. "A story of overcoming that inspires other people." "Thank you for your interest," Robert replied politely, "but it's not necessary. My story is already being told every day here at the clinic." "What do you mean?" "Every animal we save, every family we help, every person who learns to love without judgment. Those are the real stories that need to be told." After hanging up, Robert reflected on how many times he had refused similar proposals. Book deals, movies, motivational speeches, all aimed at turning his story into a commodity. "It's not about me, Buddy," he said to the dog. "It was never about me. It's about what we can do together to make the world a little better." At 8 in the morning, the clinic opened its doors for another day of appointments. The line already stretched along the sidewalk. Families with sick, injured, or animals needing preventive care. First in line was an elderly gentleman carrying a Persian cat in his arms. "Doctor," he said with a trembling voice, "my Napoleon hasn't eaten for 3 days. The other veterinarian said there's no hope left, that it's better—" His voice broke. "There's no such thing as no hope left." Robert smiled, taking the cat into his arms. "Let's see what we can do for Napoleon." And so began another day at the Johnson Community Veterinary Clinic. Another day of hope, healing, and unconditional love. Over the next several hours, Robert attended to dozens of cases, from complex surgeries to simple vaccination appointments. With each appointment, he showed the same dedication and care, treating an abandoned mutt with the same attention he would give to the most expensive purebred dog. During lunch, sitting in the courtyard with Buddy, Robert received a visit from a special surprise. Emily Grace, the teenager who had written the letter at the party, brought some news. "Dr. Johnson," she said excitedly, "I got into college. I'm going to study veterinary medicine at the same school you graduated from." Robert was moved. "Congratulations, Emily. I'm sure you'll be an excellent veterinarian." "And will you keep your promise? Can I intern here when I graduate?" "Of course," Robert smiled. In fact, how about starting as a volunteer on weekends? You can start learning early. The young woman's joy was contagious. She hugged Robert and ran to tell the news to Jessica, who had become a sort of older sister to her. In the afternoon, a case arrived at the clinic that would deeply mark everyone present. A young man, visibly nervous, was carrying a golden retriever in his arms. "Please," he said with tears in his eyes, "help my Moon. She saved my life yesterday." Robert approached, noticing that both the man and the dog had superficial injuries. "What happened?" I was in a very difficult place in my life." The young man hesitated. "I lost my job, my girlfriend, my friends. I was thinking about giving up on everything." Robert immediately understood what giving up on everything meant. "Last night I went to a bridge, but Moon wouldn't let me. She kept barking, pulling on my clothes, as if she knew what I intended to do," the young man continued. "When I finally gave up on the idea and we decided to go back home, she was hit by a car." "She got hurt saving you," Robert murmured, examining the dog. "Yes, and now I can't lose her. She's all I have left, but she's also the reason I want to live." Robert saw in Moon and her owner a reflection of his own story with Buddy. Two lost beings who found each other and saved one another. "We'll take care of Moon," he said firmly, "and we'll take care of you too." The surgery to repair the dog's injuries was successful. While Moon was recovering from anesthesia, Robert had a long conversation with the young man, whose name was Tyler. "Tyler, can I ask you a question?" said Robert. "What work did you do before?" "I was a graphic designer," Tyler replied. "I worked at an agency, but I was let go when the company went bankrupt." "Interesting. Did you know we need someone to handle the graphic materials for the clinics? Flyers, posters, campaigns?" Tyler raised his head, surprised. "Really? Completely serious. It's volunteer work, but it could be the start of something bigger. What do you think?" I accept." Tyler smiled for the first time since he arrived. "Can I work while Moon recovers?" And so, another life was transformed by the clinic's philosophy. Tyler became responsible for all visual communication across the network, creating moving campaigns that helped promote the work and attract volunteers. Months later, he opened his own design studio, specializing in work for NGOs and social projects. Moon became his official assistant, always present in the office to greet clients with affectionate licks. "Dr. Johnson," said Tyler during a visit to the clinic, "Moon and I want to thank you. You gave us back not just health, but the will to live." "You saved yourselves," Robert replied. "We just gave a little technical help." Stories like this repeated themselves constantly at the clinic. People who arrived broken and left renewed, not just with their animals healed, but with a new perspective on life. 5 years after opening, the Johnson Community Veterinary Clinic had become much more than a veterinary hospital. It was a center for human transformation, where the love for animals taught profound lessons about compassion, forgiveness, and second chances. During a Sunday afternoon, Robert was organizing some papers in his office when Buddy, now 10 years old and quieter than before, approached and rested his head on his lap. "Are you all right, my old friend?" asked Robert, petting the dog. Buddy looked at him with those wise eyes that had seen so much suffering and so much joy. His tail wagged slowly, in a calmer rhythm but still full of love. "You're getting tired, aren't you?" Robert whispered. 10 years is a long time for a dog who went through so much stress in life. As if understanding every word, Buddy licked Robert's hand and lay down at his feet, sighing contentedly. That night, Robert made a decision. It was time to start preparing others to continue the work. Not that he thought about stopping, but he knew that true movements must be bigger than their founders. The following Monday, he called a meeting with Michael, Jessica, and Mrs. Margaret. "I have a proposal for you," he said. "How about we create a school of community veterinary medicine? A place where we train professionals committed to the philosophy of caring without distinction." "A college?" asked Jessica, excited. "A different kind of school," Robert explained, "where besides technical subjects, we teach human values, where every student graduates not just as a veterinarian, but as an agent of social transformation." Michael became thoughtful. That would be amazing, Dr. Johnson. But it requires a lot of investment, approval from the Department of Education. We start small, Robert smiled. Free courses, workshops, specializations. Little by little, we build the credibility needed for a full college. Mrs. Margaret clapped her hands. Robert, that's the best idea you've ever had. Imagine how many compassionate veterinarians we can train. And so the project for the Robert Johnson School of Compassionate Veterinary Medicine was born. Elizabeth Montgomery was so excited by the idea that she offered to fund the entire initial structure. 1 year later, the school opened its doors with the first class of 30 students. The difference wasn't just the excellent technical teaching, but especially the unique courses: ethics and animal compassion, social veterinary medicine, and humanization of veterinary care. Welcome to our school, said Robert on the first day of class. Here you will not only learn to heal animals, you will learn to mend broken hearts, restore faith in humanity, and turn tears of despair into smiles of gratitude. The students listened attentively, many inspired by the professor's own story of overcoming adversity. The first lesson I want to teach is simple. Never judge an animal by the owner who accompanies it, nor an owner by their appearance, Robert continued. Love knows no social class, and desperation doesn't recognize bank accounts. A student raised her hand. Professor, is it true that you were once humiliated by colleagues in the profession? It's true, Robert confirmed without embarrassment. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. How so? Because it taught me that humility is the foundation of all wisdom, he explained. If I hadn't gone through that experience, I might never have learned to see each patient through the eyes of love instead of the eyes of judgment. Buddy, who accompanied Robert to classes as an unofficial co-teacher, was lying on a cushion in the corner of the room. The students knew that Dog was much more than a pet. He was the living symbol of the philosophy they were learning. Look at Buddy, said Robert, pointing to the dog. He doesn't know if you're rich or poor, educated or illiterate, white or black. He only feels the love you have in your heart. That's how we should treat every animal that comes to us. The school's classes became famous for their innovative methodology. Besides traditional subjects, students spent time at the community clinic, treating real cases under supervision. They learned technique and compassion simultaneously. One of the most memorable cases happened when a second-year student named Peter encountered a situation similar to what Robert had experienced years before. A homeless woman arrived at the clinic carrying a visibly malnourished dog. Some students hesitated, showing unconscious prejudice. What now? Peter asked Robert. How should we proceed? How would you proceed if she were the richest woman in the city? Robert answered with another question. With all possible care and attention, Peter replied immediately. Then you already know what to do. Peter approached the woman with kindness and respect. Ma'am, my name is Peter. I'm a veterinary student. May I examine your little friend? The woman, surprised by the courtesy, allowed the examination. The dog had parasites and malnutrition, but nothing that couldn't be treated with proper medication and regular feeding. We'll keep him for a few days to regain weight and eliminate the parasites, explained Peter. You can visit him whenever you want. But I don't have money to pay, the woman murmured, ashamed. No one pays here, Peter smiled. Our payment is seeing your little friend healthy and happy. Robert watched the scene with pride. Peter had learned the most important lesson, to treat every being with dignity, regardless of circumstances. 2 weeks later, the woman returned to pick up the dog, now fully recovered. She brought a small souvenir made from recycled materials, a handmade pen holder. It's for Dr. Peter, she said timidly. It's not much, but it's made with lots of love. Peter accepted the gift with emotion. At that moment, he fully understood what Robert always said. Gratitude isn't measured in money, but in sincerity. Professor, Peter said after the woman left, now I understand why you chose this path. The feeling of making a difference in someone's life is incomparable. And you've barely begun, Robert smiled. Wait until you graduate and see how many lives you can transform throughout your career. 7 years after opening the first clinic, the movement had expanded to 23 cities across the United States. The Robert Johnson School of Compassionate Veterinary Medicine had already graduated 150 veterinarians who brought the compassionate philosophy to their respective regions. During a graduation ceremony, Robert was honored by his former students. The class's keynote speaker was Emily Grace, the girl who had saved the kitten Whiskers and was now graduating as a veterinarian. "Professor Robert," she said in her speech, "you didn't just teach me surgical techniques. You taught me that being a veterinarian is being a guardian of life, a protector of the defenseless, a translator of love between different species." The audience applauded emotionally. Robert, seated in the front row with Buddy by his side, discreetly wiped away the tears that insisted on welling up. "But most importantly," Emily Grace continued, "you taught me that we should never give up on anyone. Not on a hopeless animal, not on a person who seems lost, not even on ourselves when life knocks us down." When the ceremony ended, the graduates approached Robert for their final congratulations. Each of them already had a guaranteed job, some in private clinics that had adopted the inclusive philosophy, others opening their own community clinics, some working in animal protection NGOs. "Professor," said one of the graduates, "how can we repay everything you taught us?" "By being compassionate veterinarians," Robert replied simply, "treating every animal as if it were Buddy with unconditional love. The rest comes naturally." That night, Robert and Buddy walked slowly through the neighborhood streets. It was a tradition of theirs. After important events, they would take a contemplative walk to process everything that had happened. "So, my old friend," said Robert, stopping at a square where they usually rested, "we managed to create something beautiful, didn't we?" Buddy sat beside him on the bench, panting but calm. At 12 years old, the dog was already clearly showing signs of old age, but his gaze still held the same intelligence and affection as always. "You saved much more than my life in that cardboard box," Robert continued, stroking his companion's graying head. "You taught me that true love doesn't judge, doesn't demand, doesn't abandon, it just loves." A young man ran through the square with his dog. Recognizing Robert, he stopped to greet him. "Dr. Johnson," said the young man, out of breath. "Do you remember me? I'm Tyler, Moon's owner." Robert smiled, recognizing the designer he had met years before. "Tyler, how are you both?" "Great," Tyler smiled, petting Moon, who was now an elderly dog but still full of life. "We opened the second studio last week. Now we have 15 employees all working on social projects." "How wonderful. And Moon?" "Still my most important partner," Tyler laughed. "She has a special little chair in the office and still greets every client with affectionate licks." They talked for a few minutes about future projects, about how life had changed for the better since that desperate day when they arrived at the clinic. "Dr. Johnson," Tyler said before saying goodbye, "can I ask a personal question?" "Of course." "Have you ever thought about what you'll do when the time comes to retire?" Robert looked at Buddy, who seemed to be sleeping peacefully beside him. "You know, Tyler, I don't think I'll ever fully retire. As long as there's an animal in need of care, and I have the strength to help, I'll be working, even with all this structure you've created. With so many former students spread across the country." "The movement is bigger than me now," Robert agreed. "But there's still so much to do. So many abandoned animals, so many people judged by their appearance, so many prejudices to break." Tyler understood that he was speaking with someone who had found not just a profession, but a life mission. "Well, I hope it continues for many years," said Tyler. "The world needs people like you." After Tyler said goodbye and continued his run with Moon, Robert was left alone with Buddy in the square. The night was peaceful, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of flowers from nearby gardens. "Buddy," he murmured, "are you awake?" The dog slowly opened his eyes, with the characteristic effort of someone growing old, but he still managed to wag his tail weakly. "I think it's time we head back home," said Robert, helping his companion to his feet. The walk back was slower than usual. Buddy stopped frequently to rest, and Robert patiently respected each pause. "No need to rush," he would say. "We have our whole lives ahead of us." But deep in his heart, Robert knew that Buddy's life was reaching its autumn. 12 years was an advanced age for a dog who had endured so much stress in his youth. That night, Buddy slept closer to Robert than usual. It was as if he knew he needed to cherish every moment beside his best friend. The next morning, Robert woke with the feeling that something had changed. Buddy was still asleep, but his breathing was slower and more labored. "Good morning, my friend," he whispered, gently stroking the dog. Buddy opened his eyes and tried to wag his tail but could barely move. Robert understood immediately. His companion was saying goodbye. "It's okay," murmured Robert, cradling Buddy's head in his hands. "You were the best friend anyone could have. You saved my life and helped save thousands of others." Buddy looked at him with those eyes that had seen so much. The cardboard box where he was abandoned, the cold streets where they went hungry together, the humiliation at the expensive clinic, the first surgery that saved his life, the first treatments at the community clinic, the students' graduations, the openings of the new units. "Thank you," whispered Robert, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you for coming into my life when I needed it most. Thank you for teaching me that true love doesn't abandon, even in the hardest moments." Buddy made one last effort and managed to lick Robert's hand. It was his way of saying thank you and I love you at the same time. Then, peacefully, surrounded by the unconditional love of his best friend, Buddy closed his eyes forever. Robert stayed there for hours, holding his companion, crying all the tears he had held back during those years of struggle and victory. When he finally managed to compose himself, he called Jessica. "Jessica," he said with a choked voice, "I need you here." "What happened, Professor?" she asked, worried by the tone of his voice. "Buddy. He's gone." Jessica understood immediately. "I'm on my way." Within minutes, Robert's house was full of people. Jessica, Michael, Mrs. Margaret, Emily Grace, Tyler with Moon, Kevin with Princess, Elizabeth Montgomery, and dozens of former students and clinic staff. Everyone mourned the loss of Buddy, but also celebrated his extraordinary life. After all, that little abandoned dog had been the catalyst for a revolution in United States veterinary medicine. "Professor," said Emily Grace, hugging Robert, "Buddy will live on in every animal we save, in every person we help, in every prejudice we break." "She's right," agreed Michael. "Buddy wasn't just your companion. He was the symbol of everything we built together." They decided to bury Buddy in the garden of the first clinic, under a tree he loved to lie under in the shade on hot days. A simple plaque was placed on the grave: "Buddy, the dog who changed the world through love." In the days that followed, condolences arrived from across the country. Patients that Buddy had comforted during difficult treatments, students he had taught through his loving presence, staff members he had greeted with celebration every day. "Professor," said Jessica 1 week after what happened, "how are you feeling?" Robert was sitting in the clinic's garden, on the bench near Buddy's grave. "Sad, obviously," he answered, "but also grateful. I had 12 wonderful years with the best friend anyone could have. And now, will you continue with the work?" "More than ever," Robert smiled sadly. "Buddy dedicated his life to teaching me about unconditional love. I can't waste that lesson now." 1 month later, Robert made a decision that surprised everyone. He adopted not 1, but 3 abandoned dogs that had arrived at the clinic. "Professor," questioned one of the students, "why 3 at once?" "Because I learned that love doesn't diminish when it's shared," Robert answered, playing with his new companions. "Actually, it multiplies." The 3 dogs, a black mixed breed named Courage, an elderly female dog named Hope, and a golden puppy named Miracle, brought new energy to Robert's life. "Each of them teaches me something different," he explained to Michael during a visit. "Courage teaches me to face challenges, Hope reminds me to never give up, and Miracle shows me that it's always possible to start over." The Johnson & Buddy Community Veterinary Clinic, official name after the tribute, continued growing. On the 10th anniversary of its founding, there were already 42 units spread across the country, 5 schools of compassionate veterinary medicine, and over 1,000 veterinarians trained in the humanized philosophy. During the anniversary ceremony, Robert was honored with a special surprise: the presence of all the first patients from each clinic in the network. "Dr. Johnson," said the ceremony's host, "we would like you to meet some of the lives you helped transform." Dozens of people with their pets came up on stage. Each one briefly shared how the care at the clinic had changed their lives. "My little cat had been given up on," said an elderly lady. "But Dr. Emily Grace, who graduated from your school, didn't give up. Today, 3 years later, Princess is here, healthy and playful. My dog was hit by a car, and we didn't have money for the treatment," shared a young family man. "Dr. Peter treated us with such kindness that my son decided he wants to be a veterinarian just like him." Story after story, Robert listened emotionally to the impact his work had caused. But the testimony that touched him the most came from Kevin, the police officer, who had recognized him that distant day at the expensive clinic. "Dr. Johnson," said Kevin into the microphone, "10 years ago, you were a broken man, humiliated, without prospects. Today you are responsible for a revolution in American veterinary medicine. But do you know what I admire most about you?" Robert waited, curious. "The fact that, despite all the success, all the fame, all the awards you've received, you remain the same humble person I met that day. You still treat every animal as if it were Buddy, with unconditional love." The audience gave a standing ovation. Robert, now with completely white hair, but still with the same sparkle in his eyes, approached the microphone. "Thank you, Kevin. Thank you all," he said, moved. "But I need to make one thing clear. I didn't create this revolution. We created it together." He pointed to the audience full of veterinarians, staff, volunteers, and clients. "Every one of you was essential to get us here. Every one of you proved that it's possible to build a more compassionate world, one animal at a time." "And the future?" someone from the audience shouted. "What are the plans for the next 10 years? Robert smiled. "The future is simple. To continue doing what Buddy taught me. To love without judging, to care without charging, and never, ever give up on a life that can be saved." After the ceremony, late at night, Robert returned home accompanied by his 3 dogs. It was a small house behind the original clinic, simple but comfortable. "Hey everyone," he said, sitting on the couch as the dogs settled around him. It was an intense day, wasn't it? Courage laid his head on Robert's lap. Hope curled up at his feet. Miracle, still a puppy and full of energy, brought a little ball to play with. "Tomorrow is another workday," Robert said, petting all 3 at once. "More lives to save, more prejudices to break, more love to spread." He looked at the picture of Buddy on the wall, an image of the dog smiling in the clinic's yard. "Thank you, my old friend," he whispered, "for everything. For saving me when I was lost, for teaching me the true meaning of love, and for continuing to inspire me every day." And so, surrounded by his new companions but forever carrying the memory and teachings of Buddy, Robert Johnson continued his mission. To prove that true love knows no barriers, makes no distinctions, and always finds a way to transform the world. End of story. Now tell me, what did you think of this story of overcoming and unconditional love? Do you believe Robert made the right decisions by forgiving those who humiliated him and dedicating his life to helping those in need? Leave your opinion in the comments. I love reading every sincere message from you. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartfelt stories we've prepared with great care for you.